If you weren't aware of the legendary hauntings on Ocean Avenue, passing through Amityville, New York would not even raise an eyebrow. There are no signs along the road pointing to historic markers. There are no gift shops selling "I survived the Amityville Horror" shirts. No tour guides. Just a lazy Long Island village along the Atlantic Ocean. That's the way the residents would prefer you to see the area too. The house that terrorized the Lutz family in November of 1975 is a scourge to the community. This quiet seaside town sits an hour outside of the hustle and bustle of New York City, and the influx of tourists that the murders and stories of hauntings bring is wholly unwanted. Though his story has changed several times over the past 4 decades, it is clear that on November 13, 1974, around 3 a.m., Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed all 6 members of his family with a .35 Marlin rifle as they slept in their beds in the house at 112 Ocean Avenue. Many facts of the case are odd, including the similar way the bodies were all posed in their beds, the fact that each family member slept through the gunshot blasts, and that no neighbors heard gunshots, only the barking of dogs. DeFeo has also expressed that he was instructed to act as he did by voices in his head. DeFeo was brought to the police station for questioning immediately following the incident, and after a couple of months in court, he was sentenced to 6 concurrent sentences of 25 years to life. DeFeo is currently held at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in the town of Fallsburg, New York, and all of his appeals and requests to the parole board to date have been denied. A year after the DeFeo murders, George and Kathy Lutz moved their family into the large Dutch colonial house, optimistically dubbing it High Hopes. They spent the next 28 days in terror. Some of the experiences of the Lutz family at the house are described in the Amityville Horror book as follows. George would wake up around 3:15 every morning and would go check the boathouse. Later he would learn that this was the estimated time of the DeFeo killings. The house was plagued by swarms of flies despite the winter weather. Kathy had vivid nightmares about the murders and discovered the order in which they occurred and the rooms where they took place. The Lutz children also began sleeping on their stomachs in the same way that the dead bodies in the DeFeo murders had been found. Kathy would feel a sensation as if feeling embraced in a loving manner by an unseen force. There were cold spots and odors of perfume and excrement in areas of the house where no wind drafts or piping could explain the source. The Lutz's 5-year-old daughter Missy developed an imaginary friend named Jody, a demonic pig-like creature with glowing red eyes. In the early morning hours of Christmas Day 1975, George Lutz looked up at the house after checking the boathouse and saw Jody standing behind Missy at her bedroom window. When he ran up to her room, he found her fast asleep with her small rocking chair slowly rocking back and forth. In the years since, there have been admissions of hoax and retractions of those admissions. Both George and Kathy Lutz passed polygraph tests. George and Kathy passed away in 2006 and 2004, respectively. Their children remain. Christopher and Danny have spoken out about their time in the house in books and documentaries. They largely attribute what is known about the house to Hollywood taking many liberties, but do claim they experienced shadow people and a handful of the other original claims. Missy Lutz has never spoken on the subject. If you weren't aware of the legendary haunting on Ocean Avenue, passing through Amityville would not even raise an eyebrow. But if you are familiar, the signs leading into town will raise the hair on your neck. Spirits and evil certainly do not recognize man's territorial boundaries, yet seeing the name alone sends shivers down your spine. After winding around the roads and through the town, you pass the plaza where DeFeo and Lutz would visit their favorite bar, the Witch's Brew, and pretty quickly come to Ocean Avenue. As a longtime reader of the stories and fan of the films, it's really quite unbelievable. You know that it is real, and you know it is supposedly based on a true story, but there's something about seeing it with your own eyes. After turning right onto Ocean Avenue, I continued down the street. The fact that in reality the house sits in a very normal neighborhood with houses close on either side is a surprising fact. My recollection of the films, which are responsible for most people's idea of the house, was that it was more isolated. I grew anxious coming down the road, wondering how impactful my first view of the house would be. Then, completely undramatically, there it was. High Hopes was just sitting there. I think I had let out an audible "there it is," and made a right turn across from it to swing my car around to get a better look. There it sat, the Lux House of Horrors. Perhaps more importantly, the site of the DeFeo family murders. When you set aside the fantastic at that moment and consider the undeniable history of this house, It becomes clear why the town doesn't want to celebrate its existence, and very much would like to move beyond the stories. The address has been changed. The iconic windows of High Hopes that had arched inward, often described as eyes of the house, were removed to distance it from the image that visitors would be expecting, and the private property signs in the corners of the yard beg visitors to keep their distance, if they have to come there at all. And of course, I did have to come there, and I did keep my distance. I simply snapped one photo and headed back into town for some dinner. The Amityville Horror House is perhaps the most well-known and most haunted house of all time, or perhaps it is the most well-known and biggest haunted house hoax of all time. Maybe we'll never know, but the house is very real and worth a respectful visit.